The Alpha King left a $2 tip for 6 years. Then his last envelope transformed the waitress's life. The coffee pot was still hot when Elena Vasquez heard the bell above the door ring at exactly 7 in the morning. She did not need to look up. She already knew who it was. 6 years of the same sound, the same time, the same weight of footsteps crossing the tile floor, had trained her body to react before her mind caught up. Her shoulders tightened, her jaw clenched. She forced her face into a smile that had become as automatic as breathing. The man walked to the corner booth, the one nobody else was allowed to sit in even though there was no sign saying so. He wore the same gray jacket he always wore, even in the heat of summer. His hands trembled slightly as he pulled out the chair. His eyes, pale blue and tired, looked at nothing in particular. Elena grabbed the coffee pot and a clean mug and walked over, her sneakers squeaking against the floor that had been mopped only an hour earlier. She placed the mug down without being asked and poured the coffee to the exact same level she always did, just below the rim, because she remembered that 6 years ago he had complained once, quietly, that too much coffee spilled when he lifted the cup. "Morning, Mr. Alden," she said, her voice light, practiced, warm on the surface. He nodded. He never said much. Sometimes he said nothing at all. Today he simply looked at her for a second longer than usual, and something in his expression made her pause, though she could not name what it was. She brushed the feeling aside. She had rent to worry about. She had her son's medicine to think about. She did not have time to wonder about the inner life of a silent old man who ordered the same thing every single week. "The usual?" she asked. He nodded again. She walked to the kitchen window and called out the order to the cook, a heavy-set man named Gary who had worked at the diner longer than Elena had been alive. Black coffee, 2 slices of toast. Butter on the side, not on the toast, because 6 years ago he had mentioned that soggy toast was worse than dry toast, and Elena had never forgotten it. While she waited for the toast, she glanced at the clock. 7:15. Her shift had started at 6. She had already been on her feet for over an hour, and her lower back was beginning its slow, familiar ache. She thought about her son, Diego, 8 years old, asleep at his grandmother's apartment 2 blocks away, his small body fighting a condition that required medicine she could barely afford. She thought about the eviction notice sitting unopened on her kitchen counter. She thought about how she had not slept more than 5 hours in longer than she could remember. And still, every Tuesday, she found herself walking to this corner booth with a plate of toast, smiling at a man who left her exactly $2 on a check that came to 6. It had become something of a joke among the staff. The other waitresses called him Mr. $2 behind his back, though never within earshot. New employees who did not know the routine sometimes offered to take his table, thinking they were doing Elena a favor. She always refused. She did not explain why, mostly because she did not fully understand it herself. There was something about the man's stillness that felt different from the chaos of everything else in her life. He never yelled. He never complained. He never asked for anything beyond what he ordered. In a life filled with landlords who threatened, managers who criticized, and a medical system that seemed designed to crush ordinary people, Mr. Alden was a strange kind of relief. Predictable, quiet, undemanding, except for the frustratingly small tip that never grew, no matter how the economy shifted, or how prices climbed around them. She brought the toast out and set it in front of him. He ate slowly, methodically, cutting each slice into 4 small triangles, before eating them one at a time. She had watched him do this so many times that she could probably draw the pattern from memory. "Cold morning," she said, more to fill the silence than anything else. "Yes," he said, "colder than usual for this time of year." It was the most he had said to her in weeks. She lingered for a moment, waiting to see if he would say more, but he simply picked up his coffee and took a slow sip, his eyes drifting toward the window where the gray morning light filtered through dusty glass. Elena moved on to her other tables. A young couple wanted extra syrup. An older man in a baseball cap wanted his eggs redone because they were too runny. A group of construction workers came in loud and hungry, filling the diner with noise and laughter that echoed off the walls. Elena moved between them all, with the practiced grace of someone who had spent a decade absorbing other people's needs while quietly starving her own. By the time she circled back to the corner booth, Mr. Alden was gone. In his place sat a small stack of bills beside his empty plate. She picked them up without needing to count, though she counted anyway, out of habit. $6 for the meal, $2 left behind, exactly as it always was. She stood there for a moment longer than she should have, staring at the 2 crumpled bills in her hand, feeling something she could not quite explain. Not quite anger, not quite sadness, something closer to exhaustion, the kind that came from doing the same small thankless thing, over and over, without knowing why she kept doing it. "He stiffed you again?" Gary called from the kitchen window, a smirk on his face. "It's fine," Elena said, tucking the money into her apron pocket. "You know, most people would have stopped serving him years ago." "He's a good customer," she said, though even she was not entirely sure why she defended him. "Good customers tip more than $2, Elena." She did not respond. She simply wiped down the corner booth, refilled the napkin dispenser, and moved on to her next table. Because that was what she did. She kept moving. She had learned a long time ago that stopping to question things rarely made her life easier. It only made the exhaustion sharper. The rest of her shift blurred together the way most of her shifts did. She refilled coffee cups. She cleared plates. She smiled at people who barely looked at her, and she absorbed complaints from people who seemed to believe that raising their voice would somehow fix their cold eggs faster. By the time her shift ended at 3 in the afternoon, her feet throbbed, and her lower back screamed with every step, but she still had one more stop to make before she could rest. She walked the 2 blocks to her mother's apartment, where Diego was waiting for her, sitting cross-legged on the floor with a coloring book spread out in front of him. His face lit up when she walked in, and for a moment, all the exhaustion of the day melted away. "Mama," he said, jumping up and wrapping his arms around her waist. "Hey, baby," she said, kneeling down to hug him properly. "Did you take your medicine today?" "Grandma made me," he said, wrinkling his nose. "It tastes bad." "I know, but it helps you feel strong, remember?" He nodded, though his enthusiasm had clearly dimmed at the mention of medicine. Elena's mother, Rosa, walked in from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her face carrying the same tired lines that seemed to run in the family. "How was work?" Rosa asked. "Same as always," Elena said, sitting down at the small kitchen table. "Busy. Tiring. Did that man come in again? The quiet one?" Elena nodded. "And he still only leaves $2? Still $2. Rosa shook her head, sitting down across from her daughter. 6 years, Elena. 6 years and he never gives more. You should stop being so nice to him." "It's not about being nice," Elena said, though she struggled to explain what it was actually about. "Consistent. In a way, nothing else in my life is." Rosa reached across the table and took her daughter's hand, her fingers rough from decades of hard work. "I worry about you, mija. You work so hard, and it feels like the world keeps taking from you without giving anything back." Elena squeezed her mother's hand, feeling the familiar tightness in her throat that came whenever someone acknowledged just how hard things had become. "We're getting by," she said, though even she did not fully believe it. "The landlord called again," Rosa said quietly. "He wants to know about the rent." Elena closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of the day settle heavier onto her shoulders. "I'll figure it out," she said. "I always figure it out." That night, after Diego had fallen asleep and Rosa had gone to bed, Elena sat alone at her kitchen table with a stack of bills spread out in front of her. She did the math over and over, moving numbers around in her head, as if rearranging them might somehow make the total smaller. It never did. No matter how she calculated it, she was short. She was always short. She thought about her ex-husband, long gone, who had left when Diego's diagnosis had become too much responsibility for him to bear. She thought about the promises she had made to herself when she was younger, promises about the life she would build, the person she would become. None of those promises matched the reality sitting in front of her on that kitchen table. And yet, somehow, her mind kept drifting back to the quiet man in the corner booth. She did not understand why his presence mattered so much to her, why she felt a strange sense of loyalty to someone who gave her so little in return. Perhaps it was simply because he never asked anything of her beyond what she was already giving. Perhaps it was because, in a life full of chaos, he represented a small, steady constant she could count on, even if that constant came with only $2 attached to it. She gathered the bills into a neat stack, placed them back into the drawer where she kept them hidden from herself as much as from anyone else, and went to bed, knowing that tomorrow would bring the same routine all over again. Another shift, another set of tired feet. Another Tuesday would come eventually, and Mr. Alden would sit in his corner booth, order his black coffee and his toast cut into 4 triangles, and leave behind exactly $2, as steady and unchanging as the tide. What Elena did not know, could not have known, was that this quiet, unassuming ritual, one she had grown to both resent and rely upon, was about to change in a way she never could have imagined. The man in the gray jacket was not simply a creature of habit. He was watching her, more closely than she realized, weighing something far larger than the cost of his breakfast. And soon, everything she believed about her life, about her struggles, and about the meaning of small, quiet kindness, would be tested in ways she could never have prepared for. For now, though, she only knew exhaustion, and the small comfort of routine, and the strange, persistent presence of a man who never gave more than $2, but who had, without her realizing it, already begun to change the course of her life. 6 years is a long time to remember the details of a stranger. Elena had not planned for it to happen. In the beginning, Mr. Alden had simply been another face among dozens she served every week. One more customer whose orders she memorized out of necessity rather than affection. But somewhere along the way, the routine had settled into something deeper, something she could not easily explain to anyone who asked. It began during her 2nd year at the diner, back when she was still new enough to feel nervous about every table she approached. She remembered the first time he had walked in, dressed in the same gray jacket, sitting down without a word, waiting patiently until someone noticed him. She had been the one to notice. She had brought him water without being asked, and he had thanked her with a small nod, nothing more. At the time, she had not thought much of it. Customers came and went. Some were kind, some were rude, and most fell somewhere in between, too distracted by their own lives to notice the person serving them. Mr. Alden fell into a category all his own. He was neither warm nor cold. He simply existed in his corner booth every Tuesday morning, ordering the same meal, saying very little, and leaving behind the same $2 every single time. The other waitresses had noticed the pattern long before Elena had allowed herself to think about it seriously. Whispers circulated in the break room, jokes exchanged over quick sips of coffee before shifts began. Someone had nicknamed him the Ghost because he seemed to appear and disappear without leaving much of an impression beyond the small stack of bills on the table. Someone else had suggested he simply did not understand how tipping worked, though that theory quickly fell apart, given how precise and deliberate his other habits were. Elena remembered a particular morning during her 3rd year at the diner, when a new waitress named Priya had taken his table by mistake, unaware of the unspoken rule that Mr. Alden belonged to Elena. Priya had come back to the kitchen annoyed, muttering about the old man who barely spoke and left almost nothing behind. Elena had felt an unexpected surge of protectiveness rise in her chest, one she did not fully understand at the time. "He always tips like that," she had told Priya. "It's not you, it's just how he is." "Then why do you keep serving him?" Priya had asked, genuinely confused. Elena had not had a good answer then, and she still did not have one now. She simply knew that something about Mr. Alden's presence, his quiet consistency, felt different from the chaos surrounding the rest of her life. He never demanded anything beyond what he ordered. He never criticized her service. He never made comments about her appearance or her attitude, unlike some of the other regulars, who seemed to believe that paying for a meal entitled them to comment on everything else about the person serving it. As the years passed, Elena began noticing small details about him that most people would have missed. She noticed how he always folded his napkin into a neat triangle before leaving, even though the tables were cleared regardless. She noticed how his hands, though steady enough to hold a coffee cup, sometimes trembled slightly when he reached for his wallet, as though some invisible weight pressed down on him. She noticed how his eyes would occasionally drift toward the window, staring at something far beyond the parking lot outside, lost in thoughts he never shared. There had been a particular Tuesday during her 4th year working at the diner, when Elena had been going through one of the hardest periods of her life. Diego had been hospitalized for nearly a week due to complications with his condition, and Elena had been running on almost no sleep, splitting her time between work and the hospital, trying desperately to hold everything together. She remembered serving Mr. Alden that morning, with hands that shook slightly from exhaustion, nearly spilling his coffee as she poured it. He had looked up at her that day, his pale blue eyes studying her face for a long moment. She remembered feeling embarrassed, worried that he might complain about her unsteady hands or her obvious exhaustion. Instead, he had simply asked, in his quiet, measured voice, if everything was all right. She had been so surprised by the question that she had nearly dropped the coffee pot entirely. Customers rarely asked about her well-being. Most of them barely registered her as a person beyond the role she played in bringing them their food. But Mr. Alden had asked, and something about the sincerity in his voice had made her answer honestly, telling him briefly about Diego's hospitalization, though she quickly apologized for burdening him with her problems. He had said nothing in response beyond a small nod, and she had assumed the conversation was forgotten as quickly as it had begun. But when he left that day, he had left behind not only his usual $2, but also a small folded piece of paper with the name and number of a specialist. Someone Elena later learned was one of the most respected pediatric doctors in the region, someone who typically had a waiting list stretching over a year. She had been too proud, too overwhelmed, and too suspicious of receiving unexpected help to call the number immediately. It had taken her nearly 2 weeks of watching Diego's condition worsen slightly before she finally gathered the courage to make the call. To her shock, the specialist's office had been expecting her, as though someone had already arranged for her to be seen. The appointment had happened within days, and the treatment recommendations that followed had made a significant difference in Diego's health going forward. Elena had never confirmed whether Mr. Alden had personally arranged the referral, or whether it had simply been a coincidence, a number he happened to have on hand for reasons unrelated to her situation. She had tried to thank him the following Tuesday, but he had waved off her gratitude with the same quiet reserve he always carried, insisting that he had simply passed along information, nothing more. That moment, more than any other, had cemented something in Elena's mind, even if she could not fully articulate it. Mr. Alden was not simply a distant customer who enjoyed the convenience of a loyal waitress. There was something deeper happening beneath his silence, something she could not name but instinctively trusted. Still, the frustration of the $2 tip never fully disappeared, especially as her financial situation grew more difficult with each passing year. There were mornings when she calculated, almost bitterly, how much money she had lost over the years, serving him faithfully every single Tuesday. 6 years of $2 tips amounted to a modest sum, barely enough to cover a single month of Diego's medication, and yet she had continued the ritual without fail, turning down better shifts and ignoring the mockery of her coworkers simply to maintain what had become an unspoken bond between herself and the quiet man in the corner booth. Her manager at the time, a woman named Carol who ran the diner with the efficiency of someone who had seen every type of customer imaginable, had once pulled Elena aside to discuss the situation directly. "You're one of my best girls," Carol had said, leaning against the counter with her arms crossed. "But I don't understand why you keep giving your best section to a man who barely tips you enough to cover your gas money. He's a good customer in other ways," Elena had said, repeating the same defense she always gave, though even she recognized how weak it sounded when spoken aloud. "Good customers tip," Carol had said bluntly. "Everything else is just a nice story you're telling yourself." Elena had not argued further, mostly because she did not have the energy to defend a belief she could not fully explain. But she had continued serving Mr. Alden every Tuesday regardless, driven by something instinctive, something that told her this quiet, unassuming ritual mattered in ways she could not yet understand. As the years passed and Diego grew older, his medical needs evolving alongside him, Elena's financial pressures only intensified. She picked up extra shifts wherever she could, sometimes working long stretches that left her barely able to stand by the time she returned home each night. She sold pieces of jewelry that had once belonged to her grandmother, keepsakes she had sworn she would never part with, simply to cover unexpected medical expenses that seemed to appear faster than she could plan for them. Through it all, Mr. Alden remained a constant presence, arriving every Tuesday morning like clockwork, ordering his black coffee and his toast cut into 4 neat triangles, saying very little beyond brief comments about the weather or the state of the parking lot outside. And every Tuesday, without fail, he left behind exactly $2, an amount that never grew despite the rising cost of living around them, despite the years that passed, despite everything changing except this one small, stubborn detail. Elena often wondered, during quiet moments between shifts, what exactly kept her tethered to this ritual. She wondered whether it was simple habit, the comfort of predictability in a life defined by chaos, or whether it was something deeper, some instinctive recognition that Mr. Alden represented more than what he appeared to be on the surface. She did not have an answer, not then, though she suspected, somewhere in the back of her mind, that the truth would eventually reveal itself. For now, she continued the routine, pouring his coffee to the exact level he preferred, remembering his preferences without needing to be told, and accepting his $2 tip with the same practiced grace she had learned to apply to every disappointment life had handed her. She did not know that this careful, quiet balance was about to be tested in ways she could never have anticipated. Nor did she know that the man she had grown to both resent and quietly trust was preparing, in his own slow and deliberate way, to reveal a truth that would change everything she believed about her life, her struggles, and the value of the small kindnesses she had given so freely, without ever expecting anything in return. The eviction notice sat on the kitchen counter for 3 days before Elena finally worked up the courage to open it. She already knew what it would say. She had missed a payment the month before, promising the landlord she would catch up, and though she had managed to send a partial payment since then, it clearly had not been enough to satisfy him. She read the letter twice, her hands trembling slightly as she absorbed the formal language demanding full payment within 2 weeks, or facing legal action to remove her and Diego from the apartment they had called home for the past 4 years. She folded the letter carefully and placed it back on the counter, staring at it as though staring might somehow change the words printed on the page. That night, after Diego had gone to sleep, Elena sat at the kitchen table with a notebook and a calculator, trying to find some combination of numbers that would allow her to meet the deadline. No matter how she arranged the figures, the math refused to work in her favor. Her tips from the diner, even on her best weeks, barely covered rent and Diego's medication combined. Anything extra, anything unexpected, threatened to tip the fragile balance she had built over the years. She thought about asking her mother for help, but Rosa was already stretched thin, working part-time at a laundromat, while managing her own health issues that had worsened with age. She thought about reaching out to old friends, but pride held her back. The same pride that had kept her from making that first phone call to the specialist, years earlier. She thought about picking up more shifts, but she was already working nearly every day the diner was open, leaving little room for additional hours. The next morning, she arrived at work exhausted, her eyes red from lack of sleep, her mind cluttered with numbers that refused to add up in her favor. The diner was busier than usual, a Monday rush that left little time for rest between tables. By the time Tuesday arrived, Elena felt as though she were moving through the day in a fog, her body performing familiar motions, while her mind remained trapped in worry. When Mr. Alden walked in that morning, she barely registered his arrival beyond the automatic reflexes that had been trained into her over 6 years of routine. She poured his coffee to the exact level he preferred, brought his toast cut into 4 triangles, and moved on to her other tables without engaging in even the brief small talk that had occasionally passed between them. It was during her second pass by his table that a new manager, a younger man named Derek who had recently taken over for Carol after her retirement, pulled Elena aside near the kitchen entrance. "I've been watching the numbers," Derek said, his tone carrying the particular confidence of someone new to a position of authority. "That table in the corner, the old man who comes in every Tuesday." "Mr. Alden," Elena said. "Whatever his name is," Derek continued. "He's been coming in for years, right? And he still only leaves $2? Elena nodded, feeling a familiar tension rise in her chest. "I think it's time we stop wasting a full table on someone who doesn't tip properly," Derek said. "We could seat 2 smaller parties in that booth during the same time slot and increase our turnover. It just doesn't make sense from a business perspective to keep holding that corner for a single customer who barely contributes to your income." Elena felt something sharp rise inside her, an unexpected wave of defensiveness that surprised even herself given how exhausted and distracted she had felt only moments earlier. "He's been coming here for 6 years," she said. "He's part of the routine here. Customers notice things like that. It builds trust." "Trust doesn't pay the bills, Elena," Derek said, though his tone remained calm, almost dismissive rather than confrontational. "I'm not saying we kick him out. I'm just saying, maybe it's time to reconsider how we allocate our best sections." "I'll keep serving him," Elena said firmly, surprising herself with the conviction in her voice. "If it becomes a problem, we can talk about it then." Derek studied her for a moment, clearly unaccustomed to pushback from staff, but he eventually shrugged and walked away, muttering something about revisiting the conversation later. Elena stood there for a moment, her heart pounding slightly from the unexpected confrontation, wondering why she had defended Mr. Alden so fiercely when she herself had spent years quietly resenting the very same $2 tip that Derek was criticizing. She walked back toward the corner booth to check on him, finding him exactly where she had left him, slowly working through his toast, his eyes fixed on something outside the window. She refilled his coffee without being asked, and for a moment, their eyes met. "Everything all right?" he asked, his voice quiet but carrying an unusual note of concern. Elena hesitated, unsure how much to share. She had never discussed her personal struggles with him beyond that one moment, years earlier, involving Diego's hospitalization. But something about the exhaustion of the past few days, combined with the tension of her conversation with Derek, loosened something in her, and before she could stop herself, she found herself briefly mentioning the eviction notice, though she quickly downplayed its severity, embarrassed at having said anything at all. Mr. Alden listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable as always. When she finished speaking, he simply nodded slowly, as though processing information rather than reacting emotionally to it. "These things have a way of resolving themselves," he said quietly, "sometimes when we least expect it." Elena forced a small smile, though privately she doubted his words carried any real weight. People often offered vague reassurances without understanding the specific mechanics of financial desperation, the sleepless nights spent recalculating numbers that refused to improve no matter how many times she rearranged them. She thanked him for his concern and moved on to her other tables, assuming his comment had been nothing more than a polite, if somewhat empty, attempt at comfort. When he left that day, he left behind his usual $2, along with a small nod in her direction before walking out the door. Elena picked up the money, feeling a familiar mixture of gratitude and quiet frustration, and tucked it into her apron pocket alongside the growing weight of everything else she carried. The following days brought little relief. The eviction deadline loomed closer, and despite her best efforts, Elena remained unable to gather the full amount needed to satisfy her landlord. She began quietly researching emergency assistance programs, filling out applications during her rare moments of downtime, though most of the programs she found required weeks of processing time she simply did not have. Diego, sensing his mother's stress despite her attempts to hide it, began asking questions she struggled to answer honestly. "Are we going to have to move again?" he asked one evening, while she helped him with his homework at Rosa's kitchen table. "We're not moving anywhere," Elena said, forcing confidence into her voice that she did not fully feel. "Mama's going to figure everything out." Diego studied her for a moment with the particular perceptiveness that children sometimes possess, seeing through adult reassurances more clearly than adults often realized. He said nothing more about it, though Elena could tell the worry lingered in his young mind, regardless of her attempts to shield him from it. That night, after returning to her own apartment, Elena sat once again at her kitchen table, staring at the same numbers that refused to improve no matter how she calculated them. She thought about Mr. Alden's words, the strange, calm confidence with which he had suggested that things would resolve themselves. She wondered, not for the first time, what exactly lay behind his quiet, unassuming presence. What history had shaped a man who seemed so untouched by the chaos that governed everyone else's lives? She had no way of knowing, not yet, that Mr. Alden had already begun setting something in motion, something far larger and more consequential than a simple offhand comment meant to comfort a stressed waitress during a difficult week. She only knew that her financial situation remained precarious, that the deadline continued approaching regardless of her efforts, and that somewhere beneath the surface of her carefully maintained composure, cracks were beginning to show. Cracks that threatened to widen into something far more difficult to repair than a simple missed rent payment. For now, she continued moving forward the only way she knew how, one exhausting shift at a time, one small act of quiet defiance at a time, refusing to let go of a ritual that made little logical sense but that somehow, in ways she could not yet articulate, felt essential to holding her fragile world together. The Tuesday that changed everything began like any other. Elena arrived at the diner before sunrise, tying her apron with hands still stiff from the cold morning air, preparing the coffee station the way she had done thousands of times before. The eviction deadline was now only 4 days away, and despite weeks of effort, she remained short of the amount needed to satisfy her landlord. She had not slept properly in what felt like ages, her mind cycling endlessly through possibilities that never quite solved her problem. At 7 o'clock exactly, the bell above the door rang, and Mr. Alden walked in. But something was different this time. Elena noticed it immediately. The way his steps seemed slower than usual, more deliberate, as though each movement required careful calculation. His face, always pale, appeared even more drawn than she remembered, with a grayish tint beneath his eyes that suggested exhaustion far beyond a simple lack of sleep. He settled into the corner booth with visible effort, and Elena hurried over with a concern she rarely allowed herself to show toward customers, given how carefully she usually maintained professional distance. "Are you feeling all right, Mr. Alden?" she asked, setting down his usual mug before pouring the coffee. He looked up at her, and for a moment, something flickered across his expression that she had never seen from him before. A vulnerability that seemed entirely out of place, given his usual quiet composure. "Just tired," he said, his voice slightly rougher than usual. "These days feel longer than they used to." She nodded, though concern lingered in her mind, as she walked away to prepare his toast. When she returned, she noticed his hands trembling more noticeably than usual, as he reached for the coffee cup, and a small cough escaped him before he could suppress it. "Should I call someone for you?" Elena asked, genuinely worried now. "You don't look well." "I'm fine," he said, though his tone lacked its usual firmness. "Just old age catching up with me, I suppose." Elena hesitated, uncertain whether to press further, but something in his eyes told her not to push the matter. She simply nodded, and returned to her other tables, though she found herself glancing toward the corner booth more frequently than usual, watching him eat his toast with unusually slow, deliberate movements. When she finally returned to check on him again, something had shifted in the atmosphere around the table. Mr. Alden had finished his meal, his plate pushed slightly aside, and he sat with his hands folded in front of him, watching her approach with an expression she could not quite place. "Elena," he said, using her name directly for what felt like the first time in years of routine interaction, though she knew he must have learned it from her name tag long ago. "I want to thank you. For everything." The phrase struck her as odd, out of place, given the ordinary nature of their interactions over the years. Customers thanked waitresses for coffee refills, for accommodating special requests, for patience during busy hours. They did not typically thank waitresses for everything, a phrase that suggested something far more expansive and significant than a simple breakfast service. "You're welcome," she said carefully, unsure how else to respond to such an unusual statement. "Is everything okay?" "Everything is exactly as it should be," he said, his voice carrying a strange calm that unsettled her more than his earlier weakness had. He reached into the inside pocket of his gray jacket and withdrew a small envelope, sealed and slightly worn at the edges, as though it had been carried for some time before finally being presented. Written across the front, in handwriting that appeared shaky but deliberate, were two words: "Not yet." He placed the envelope on the table beside his usual $2, sliding it toward her with careful precision. "Take this," he said, "but don't open it, not yet." Elena stared at the envelope, confusion mixing with a growing sense of unease. "What is it?" "You'll understand when the time comes," he said. "For now, just keep it somewhere safe." She picked up the envelope hesitantly, feeling its weight, lighter than she expected given the strange gravity of the moment. "Mr. Alden, I don't understand. Is something wrong? Are you sick?" He offered her a small, tired smile, the first genuine smile she could recall seeing from him in 6 years of Tuesdays. "We're all sick with something eventually," he said quietly. "Time catches up with everyone, one way or another." Before she could ask further questions, he rose slowly from the booth, moving with visible effort, and made his way toward the door without another word. Elena stood frozen for a moment, the envelope clutched in her hand, watching his retreating figure disappear through the entrance and into the gray morning light outside. She glanced down at the table and noticed his usual $2 still sitting where he had left them, alongside a folded napkin, arranged with the same careful precision he always applied to his belongings before leaving. She picked up both the money and the envelope, tucking them into her apron pocket, her mind swirling with questions she could not begin to answer. For the rest of her shift, Elena found herself distracted, her thoughts repeatedly drifting back to the strange encounter. She wondered what could possibly be inside the envelope, why he had instructed her not to open it, and what exactly he had meant by his cryptic comment about time catching up with everyone. She considered opening it immediately, curiosity gnawing at her, but something about the solemnity of his request held her back. Whatever this was, It clearly meant something significant to him, and she felt an obligation to honor his wishes, even if she did not fully understand them. When she returned home that evening, after picking up Diego from her mother's apartment and settling him into bed, Elena sat alone in her kitchen, the envelope placed carefully on the table in front of her. She studied the handwriting on the front, the slight tremor visible in the pen strokes, and wondered again about the man behind those two simple words. She thought about all the years she had served him, all the small details she had memorized about his preferences, and realized, with a small pang of guilt, how little she actually knew about him beyond his order and his precise, unchanging tip. She did not know where he lived, what he had done for a living, whether he had family, or why he seemed to carry such quiet sorrow beneath his composed exterior. 6 years of Tuesdays, and she had never once asked him a personal question, beyond simple pleasantries about the weather. She placed the envelope in a drawer in her kitchen, tucking it beneath a stack of old bills and paperwork, resisting the temptation to open it despite her curiosity. She told herself she would wait, as he had instructed, though she had no idea how long that waiting period might last, or what circumstances would eventually signal that the time had finally arrived. That night, she found it difficult to sleep, her mind cycling not only through her usual worries about rent and Diego's medical needs, but now also through the strange encounter with Mr. Alden, his uncharacteristic weakness, his unusual words of gratitude, and the mysterious envelope now hidden in her kitchen drawer. She wondered whether she would see him again the following Tuesday, whether this had simply been an unusual moment brought on by a bad day, or whether it represented something far more significant, a turning point she could not yet fully comprehend. She fell asleep eventually, exhaustion overtaking her racing thoughts, unaware that the following Tuesday would bring not answers, but an absence that would leave her with far more questions than she had ever anticipated, and a grief she could not have predicted for a man she had spent 6 years serving, without ever truly knowing. The following Tuesday arrived with an unusual heaviness that Elena could not quite explain. She arrived at the diner at her usual time, prepared the coffee station as always, and found herself watching the door more closely than she typically did, waiting for the familiar sound of the bell that would announce Mr. Alden's arrival. 7 o'clock came and went. The bell rang several times as other customers filtered in, but none of them were him. Elena told herself it meant nothing, that perhaps he had simply overslept or decided to visit a different establishment for once. She busied herself with her other tables, though her attention kept drifting toward the empty corner booth, its surface clean and undisturbed, waiting for an occupant who never arrived. By 8 o'clock, a small knot of worry had settled in her stomach. She approached Gary at the kitchen window during a brief lull in orders. "Have you seen Mr. Alden today?" she asked, trying to keep her voice casual despite the concern building within her. Gary shook his head. "Not yet. Maybe he's running late." But Elena knew, somewhere deep within her, that something was wrong. 6 years of unwavering routine did not simply break without reason. She thought back to his appearance the previous week, his uncharacteristic weakness, the strange envelope, and his cryptic words about time catching up with everyone. A cold feeling of dread began spreading through her chest, though she tried to push it aside, telling herself she was overreacting to what was likely a simple, ordinary absence. The corner booth remained empty for the rest of her shift. Elena found herself glancing toward it repeatedly throughout the day, an unfamiliar ache settling into her chest each time she noted its emptiness. She had spent years quietly resenting the small tip he left behind. Yet now, faced with his absence, she realized how deeply his presence had become, woven into the rhythm of her week. How much comfort she had unconsciously drawn from his quiet, unchanging routine. The following Tuesday brought the same result. The corner booth remained empty, the bell above the door ringing for other customers but never announcing his familiar arrival. Elena's worry deepened with each passing week, though she had no way of finding him, no address, no phone number, nothing beyond a name that may or may not have even been accurate. 3 weeks after his last visit, Elena was wiping down the counter during a slow afternoon, when an elderly regular customer, a woman named Margaret who frequented the diner for lunch several times a week, mentioned something that made Elena's heart drop. "Did you hear about the man who used to sit over there?" Margaret said, gesturing toward the corner booth while sipping her tea. "The quiet one in the gray jacket." Elena's hands stilled on the counter. "What about him?" "I heard he passed away," Margaret said, her tone carrying the casual sympathy of someone discussing a distant acquaintance rather than someone close. My neighbor mentioned it. Apparently he'd been sick for quite some time, though you'd never have known it looking at him most days. Elena felt the world tilt slightly beneath her feet, a wave of grief washing over her so unexpectedly intense that she had to grip the edge of the counter to steady herself. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's what I heard," Margaret said, apparently unaware of the impact her casual comment had produced. "Sad, really. He always seemed like such a private person. Nobody really knew much about him." Elena excused herself quickly, retreating to the small employee break room where she allowed herself a moment of privacy to process the news. She sat on the worn wooden bench, her hands trembling slightly, tears welling in her eyes despite her attempts to maintain composure. She thought about the countless Tuesdays she had spent serving him, the small details she had memorized, the brief moments of unexpected kindness he had shown her over the years, and the strange envelope now sitting hidden in her kitchen drawer. Guilt mixed painfully with her grief. She thought about all the times she had complained about his meager tip, all the moments she had allowed frustration to color her interactions with him, even if she had never let that frustration show openly. She thought about her manager Derek's dismissive comments weeks earlier, and how she had defended Mr. Alden's presence without fully understanding why she felt such loyalty toward him. Now, faced with the reality of his passing, she wished desperately that she had asked more questions, that she had taken the time to learn more about the man behind the quiet, unassuming routine. She thought about his final visit, his uncharacteristic weakness, the strange gratitude in his voice as he thanked her for everything, and his cryptic instructions regarding the envelope. She realized now, with painful clarity, that he had likely known his time was limited, that his final visit had been exactly that, a final visit, a farewell disguised as an ordinary Tuesday morning breakfast. When her shift ended that day, Elena walked home slowly, her mind heavy with grief and unanswered questions. She picked up Diego from her mother's apartment, forcing a composed exterior, despite the turmoil within her, not wanting to burden her son with emotions he was too young to fully understand. That night, after Diego had gone to sleep, Elena sat once again at her kitchen table, the mysterious envelope placed in front of her. She stared at the handwriting on the front, the two simple words that had governed her actions for weeks now. Not yet. She wondered whether now, given his passing, the time had finally arrived, or whether some other signal was meant to indicate when opening the envelope would be appropriate. She resisted the urge to open it immediately, honoring his final instruction, despite the overwhelming curiosity and grief pressing against her resolve. Instead, she placed the envelope back in the drawer, closing it carefully, and allowed herself to simply sit with her sorrow, mourning a man she had known for 6 years yet somehow, she realized now, had never truly known at all. The following days passed in a haze of quiet mourning, mixed with the ordinary demands of her life. She continued working her shifts, continued caring for Diego, continued navigating the mounting pressure of her financial situation, though her mind frequently drifted back to thoughts of Mr. Alden, wondering about the life he had lived beyond the walls of the diner, wondering about the family he may or may not have had, wondering about the true nature of the envelope still hidden in her kitchen drawer. She had no way of knowing that her period of uncertainty was nearing its end, that the answers she sought were about to arrive in a form she could never have anticipated, delivered by someone whose visit would reveal a truth about Mr. Alden that would upend everything she had believed about the quiet, unassuming man who had occupied her corner booth every Tuesday for 6 years, leaving behind nothing more than $2, and, as it would soon become clear, a legacy far greater than she could have ever imagined. It was a Thursday afternoon, nearly a month after Elena had learned of Mr. Alden's passing, when a well-dressed man walked into the diner during a rare quiet stretch between the lunch and dinner rushes. He wore a tailored suit that immediately set him apart from the diner's usual clientele, his shoes polished to a shine that seemed almost out of place against the worn tile floor. He approached the counter where Elena stood organizing napkin dispensers and cleared his throat politely to catch her attention. "Excuse me," he said. "I'm looking for someone named Elena Vasquez." Elena felt a jolt of surprise, immediately followed by wariness. Strangers rarely came looking for her by name, and given the recent turmoil surrounding her financial situation, her first instinct was concern that this might somehow relate to the eviction proceedings, or some other looming legal trouble. "That's me," she said cautiously. "Can I help you with something?" The man extended his hand, his expression carrying a professional warmth that did little to ease Elena's suspicion. "My name is Nathaniel Cross. I'm an attorney, representing the estate of a client named Walter Alden. I understand you knew him." Elena's breath caught in her throat at the mention of the name. "Mr. Alden," she said softly. "Yes, I knew him. He used to come in every Tuesday." "May we speak somewhere private?" Nathaniel asked, glancing around the diner with a discretion that suggested whatever he had to discuss required more privacy than the open dining area could provide. Elena led him to the small employee break room, her heart pounding with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. She gestured for him to sit at the worn table, taking the seat across from him while trying to steady her nerves. "I have to admit, I'm confused," Elena said. "I didn't know Mr. Alden well. He was just a regular customer here." Nathaniel opened the leather briefcase he carried, withdrawing a folder that he placed carefully on the table between them. "I understand this may come as a surprise," he said, his tone measured and professional. "But Walter Alden was not simply an ordinary customer living a quiet retirement. He was, in fact, a highly successful businessman, known throughout certain financial circles by a nickname he earned decades ago, long before you ever met him." Elena frowned, trying to reconcile this description with the quiet, unassuming man she had served every Tuesday for 6 years. "I don't understand," she said. "He always seemed so simple. He barely spoke. He drove an old car, if he even drove at all. He never dressed like someone with money." "That was very much intentional," Nathaniel said. "Mr. Alden spent the last several decades of his life deliberately avoiding the public attention that came with his earlier career. In his younger years, he built and led one of the most successful investment firms in the country, earning a reputation for sharp, sometimes ruthless business decisions that made him both feared and respected throughout the industry. People in those circles referred to him as the Alpha King, a nickname that reflected both his dominance in the business world and the cold, calculating reputation he had cultivated during that period of his life. Elena stared at him, struggling to process this information. "The Alpha King," she repeated slowly. "That doesn't sound anything like the man I knew." "That's precisely the point," Nathaniel said. "Somewhere along the way, after achieving tremendous success, Mr. Alden underwent a significant change in perspective. Those closest to him described it as a kind of awakening, a realization that the wealth and power he had accumulated meant very little without genuine human connection and integrity. He gradually withdrew from public life, transferred control of his business interests to trusted successors, and spent his remaining years living a quiet, deliberately modest existence, observing the world from a distance, rather than dominating it as he once had." Elena shook her head, still struggling to reconcile the image of the cold, calculating businessman with the gentle, quiet man who had occupied her corner booth every Tuesday. "Why would someone like that come to a diner every week and leave a $2 tip?" she asked. "If he had all that money, why act like he barely had enough to get by?" Nathaniel offered a small, knowing smile. "That, Miss Vasquez, is precisely what I've come here to explain. Mr. Alden did not simply choose your diner randomly, nor did he choose you as his server by accident. What you experienced over the past 6 years was, in many ways, a deliberate and carefully considered test, one that Mr. Alden conducted with remarkable patience and discretion." Elena felt her stomach tighten with a mixture of confusion, disbelief, and something approaching indignation. "A test? You mean he was testing me this whole time? 6 years, and he never once tipped me properly, and it was all some kind of experiment?" "I understand this may feel unsettling to hear," Nathaniel said gently, "but I would encourage you to withhold judgment until you understand the full context. Mr. Alden left behind detailed instructions regarding how this conversation should unfold, along with a letter he specifically requested be delivered to you following his passing, timed carefully to coincide with certain conditions he outlined before his death." Elena's mind raced, piecing together fragments of the past several weeks. She thought about the mysterious envelope still hidden in her kitchen drawer, the words written across its front, "Not yet." She realized now, with startling clarity, that whatever answers she sought were likely connected to both that envelope and whatever Nathaniel had come to deliver. "There's an envelope," she said slowly. "He gave it to me during his last visit. He told me not to open it yet." Nathaniel nodded, as though this confirmed something he had already anticipated. "Yes, That envelope contains a personal letter from Mr. Alden, written specifically for you, explaining his reasoning and intentions in far greater detail than I am able to provide on his behalf. However, I have also been instructed to deliver certain formal documents today, contingent upon confirming your identity and ensuring you understood at least the basic context surrounding Mr. Alden's true background before proceeding further. Elena felt overwhelmed, the sheer scope of the revelation settling slowly over her like a heavy weight she had not been prepared to carry. "I still don't understand," she said. "What does any of this have to do with me? Why would someone like that spend 6 years coming to a small diner, testing a waitress he barely knew?" Nathaniel closed the folder in front of him, folding his hands together as he studied Elena with an expression that carried genuine warmth beneath its professional exterior. "Miss Vasquez, I believe the answers you seek are best explained in Mr. Alden's own words, contained within the letter he left for you. I would strongly encourage you to return home this evening and finally open that envelope. What you find inside will, I suspect, change your understanding not only of Walter Alden, but of your own life and the value of the choices you have made over the past 6 years." He rose from his seat, straightening his suit jacket, and placed a business card on the table in front of her. "Please contact my office once you've had the opportunity to read the letter. There are further matters we will need to discuss, matters that require your active participation and decision-making, before we can proceed with finalizing certain arrangements Mr. Alden left in place specifically for you." Elena remained seated at the table long after Nathaniel had departed, staring at the business card in her trembling hands, her mind swirling with questions, disbelief, and a growing sense that her entire understanding of the past 6 years was about to be completely rewritten. She thought about the envelope waiting in her kitchen drawer, and for the first time since receiving it, she felt an urgent, undeniable need to finally uncover the truth it contained. Elena rushed home that evening, her hands shaking as she unlocked her apartment door, her mind still reeling from everything Nathaniel Cross had revealed. She had left Diego with her mother for the night, explaining only that she needed to handle something important, unwilling to bring her son into the confusion swirling within her, until she understood things better herself. She went straight to the kitchen drawer, pushing aside the stack of bills and paperwork, to retrieve the envelope she had kept hidden for weeks. She sat down at her kitchen table, the same table where she had spent countless nights calculating numbers that never quite worked in her favor, and stared at the handwriting on the front of the envelope for a long moment, before finally breaking the seal. Inside, she found several folded pages covered in the same careful, slightly shaky handwriting she had seen on the envelope. She unfolded the letter slowly, taking a deep breath before beginning to read. "Dear Elena, if you are reading this letter, it means I have passed on, and the time has finally come for you to understand the truth behind our 6 years of Tuesday mornings together. I imagine you have already spoken with Nathaniel, and that he has given you some sense of who I once was, a man some called the Alpha King, known throughout the business world for decisions that built enormous wealth but left very little room for genuine human connection. I will not pretend that the reputation was undeserved. In my younger years, I made countless decisions that prioritized profit over people, closing companies without concern for the employees who depended on them, negotiating deals that benefited myself and my closest partners, while leaving others struggling in our wake. I built an empire, Elena, but I built it upon a foundation that left very little room for kindness, patience, or genuine care for those around me. Everything changed, following a period of personal loss that I will not detail extensively here, as it remains difficult even now to fully articulate. What matters is that this loss forced me to confront the reality of the life I had built, a life filled with wealth and influence but almost entirely devoid of meaningful human connection. I realized, rather painfully and rather late, that I had spent decades measuring my worth through numbers on a balance sheet, rather than through the quality of my relationships or the impact of my kindness on those around me. I withdrew from public life gradually, transferring control of my business interests, and began a quiet search for something I could not initially name, something I eventually came to understand as a search for genuine, unselfish kindness, the kind that exists without expectation of reward or recognition. I discovered your diner quite by accident, during a period when I was still adjusting to a simpler, more anonymous existence. I remember my first visit clearly, the way you brought me water without being asked, the small kindness in your attention, despite clearly being overwhelmed by the demands of your shift. Something about your genuine warmth, offered freely, without any obvious expectation of extraordinary reward, struck me deeply. I decided, perhaps somewhat unconventionally, to observe you over an extended period, curious whether that initial kindness represented a passing moment or a genuine, consistent character trait. I began deliberately testing the boundaries of that kindness through my minimal tip, wondering whether your patience and warmth would erode under the pressure of what most would consider disrespectful treatment. Elena, you must understand that 6 years is an extraordinarily long time to conduct such an examination, and I want you to know that I never took your patience for granted, even as I continued testing it. Every Tuesday, I watched you extend genuine care toward a man who gave you almost nothing in return, beyond routine and predictability. You remembered my preferences without being asked. You defended my presence to colleagues and management, who questioned why you continued serving someone so seemingly ungrateful. You showed me kindness during moments when you yourself were clearly struggling under burdens I could only partially understand. I remember with particular clarity the day I learned of your son's hospitalization, the exhaustion evident in your hands as you served me despite your own crisis. I remember arranging that referral, watching quietly from a distance as your son received the care he needed, taking some small comfort in knowing I had been able to help, even indirectly, without revealing my true identity or intentions. Over these 6 years, Elena, you have demonstrated exactly the kind of character I spent decades searching for, without success in the business world I once inhabited. Genuine kindness, offered freely, sustained not through hope of reward, but through something deeper within your own nature. You have shown me that the values I once dismissed as impractical in my pursuit of wealth are, in fact, the very things that give life true meaning. I am not a man skilled in expressing gratitude adequately through words, and I fear this letter falls short of conveying the depth of what I feel. But I want you to know that your kindness, offered so consistently and without expectation, has restored something in me that I believed had been lost decades ago. You have shown me, more clearly than any business venture ever could, the true value of genuine human connection. Nathaniel will explain the specific arrangements I have made on your behalf. I will simply say here that I hope what follows allows you to build the life you deserve, one free from the financial burdens that have weighed so heavily upon you these past years, and one that allows Diego to receive every opportunity his bright mind deserves. I ask only one thing in return, though it is not a requirement, simply a hope I carry for you. Continue extending the kindness you have shown me toward others who may cross your path in similarly difficult circumstances, not because it will be rewarded, as it was in my case, but because that kindness, given freely, is what makes a life truly worth living. With deep and genuine gratitude, Walter Alden. Elena set the letter down on her kitchen table, tears streaming freely down her face, her chest tight with an overwhelming mixture of grief, gratitude, and disbelief. She read the letter again, slowly, absorbing details she had missed during her first emotional pass through the pages, trying to reconcile the image of the cold, calculating businessman described within its lines, with the quiet, gentle man she had known through 6 years of Tuesday mornings. She thought about all the moments she had questioned her own loyalty to him, all the times she had wondered why she continued extending patience towards someone who gave her so little in return. She realized now that her instincts, the quiet sense that something deeper existed beneath his silence, had been correct all along. She sat at her kitchen table for a long time that evening, the letter held gently in her hands, grief and gratitude intertwining in ways she had never experienced before, unaware that the following days would reveal the full scope of what Walter Alden had left behind, a legacy that would transform not only her own life, but the lives of others she had not yet even considered. Elena arrived at Nathaniel Cross's office the following morning, having called ahead as instructed, her nerves fraying with every step she took toward the tall glass building located in the heart of the city's financial district. The contrast between this polished, imposing structure and the small, worn diner where she spent her days felt almost surreal, as though she were stepping into an entirely different world. Nathaniel greeted her warmly in the lobby, guiding her toward a private conference room on the 15th floor, where large windows overlooked the city below. She sat down at the polished table, still clutching the letter she had read the night before, feeling entirely out of place amid the quiet luxury surrounding her. "I trust you've had a chance to read Mr. Alden's letter," Nathaniel said, taking a seat across from her. Elena nodded, unable to fully articulate the emotions still swirling within her. "I did. I still can't quite believe any of this is real," Nathaniel opened a leather folder and withdrew several documents, sliding them gently across the table toward her. I understand. This is a great deal to absorb. Please take your time reviewing everything. I'm here to answer any questions you might have. Elena looked down at the documents, her eyes struggling to focus on the dense legal language filling the pages. Nathaniel, sensing her difficulty, began explaining the key details in simpler terms. Mr. Alden has left you a significant portion of his personal estate, he said. This includes a sum sufficient to fully resolve your current housing situation, cover any outstanding debts, and establish a dedicated fund specifically earmarked for your son's ongoing medical care, ensuring he receives whatever treatment he requires for the remainder of his life, regardless of future costs. Elena felt her breath catch in her throat, the sheer scope of the number Nathaniel mentioned next causing her vision to blur momentarily. It was a sum so far beyond anything she had ever imagined possessing that she struggled to process it as real, rather than some kind of elaborate misunderstanding. There must be some mistake, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. This is too much. I don't understand why he would leave all of this to me. Mr. Alden was very deliberate in his decision, Nathaniel said gently. He spent considerable time ensuring this arrangement reflected exactly what he intended. There is, however, one additional component to the inheritance that I believe you should know about, one that Mr. Alden felt strongly about including. He withdrew another document, this one outlining what he described as a charitable fund, established in Mr. Alden's name, specifically designed to provide financial assistance to service industry workers facing similar hardships to those Elena herself had experienced over the years. The fund would provide emergency assistance for medical expenses, housing crises, and educational opportunities for children of workers employed in industries often overlooked when it came to benefits and financial security. Mr. Alden requested that you serve as an advisor to this fund, should you choose to accept that role, Nathaniel explained. He believed your first-hand experience, with the exact struggles this fund is designed to address, would provide invaluable guidance in ensuring the assistance reaches those who genuinely need it, distributed in ways that respect the dignity of the people receiving it. Elena sat in stunned silence, absorbing the full weight of what she was being offered, not simply personal financial relief, but an opportunity to extend the same kind of quiet, meaningful support to others facing circumstances she understood all too well. I don't know what to say, she finally managed. This is more than I ever could have imagined. I still can't quite believe he watched me for 6 years, planning all of this. He was a patient man, in the end, Nathaniel said, a small, genuine smile crossing his face. Whatever his history, whatever choices defined his earlier career, I can tell you that in his final years, he cared deeply about ensuring this arrangement reflected genuine values, rather than mere charity performed for appearance's sake. He specifically wanted to avoid simply handing you money without context, believing that true generosity required understanding, connection, and purpose, rather than simply writing a check. Elena spent the remainder of the meeting reviewing documents, asking questions, and slowly beginning to absorb the reality that her life, and Diego's life, were about to change in ways she had never dared to hope for during her years of quiet struggle. She signed the necessary paperwork with trembling hands, Nathaniel patiently guiding her through each section, explaining terms and conditions with a clarity that helped ease some of her overwhelming confusion. Before she left the office that day, Nathaniel handed her one final item, a small photograph he explained had been found among Mr. Alden's personal belongings. Elena studied the image carefully, showing a younger version of the man she had known, standing beside a woman with a warm smile, both of them appearing genuinely happy, in a way she had never witnessed from Mr. Alden during their years together at the diner. That was his wife, Nathaniel explained quietly. She passed away many years before you ever met him. Those close to him believed her loss was what ultimately triggered the transformation that led him away from his previous career, and eventually to your diner. Elena held the photograph gently, feeling a fresh wave of understanding wash over her regarding the quiet sorrow she had always sensed beneath Mr. Alden's composed exterior. She thanked Nathaniel for his time, and left the office that afternoon carrying not only legal documents that would transform her financial future, but also a deeper, more complete understanding of the man who had spent 6 years quietly observing and ultimately transforming her life. As she walked back toward the bus stop that would take her home, Elena found herself overwhelmed by a complex mixture of emotions: grief for a man she had only truly come to know after his passing, gratitude for a gift she had never sought or expected, and a growing sense of purpose regarding the opportunity now before her to extend similar kindness toward others facing the same struggles she had endured for so many years. She did not yet know how her sudden change in fortune would affect her relationships with those around her, how word would spread through her small community, or how she would navigate the attention and expectations that inevitably followed such a dramatic transformation. But for the first time in longer than she could remember, Elena felt something resembling hope, a genuine belief that the future ahead might finally offer the stability and security she had spent years struggling to achieve on her own. News travels quickly in a small community, and it did not take long for word of Elena's inheritance to spread throughout the diner and beyond. Within days, the atmosphere at work had shifted dramatically. Co-workers who had once mocked her loyalty to Mr. Alden now approached her with newfound curiosity, some offering congratulations that felt genuine, others carrying an undertone of envy they struggled to hide. Derek, the manager who had once suggested she stop wasting her best section on a customer who barely tipped, approached her during a quiet morning shift with an expression that mixed awkwardness and calculation. "I heard about everything," he said. "That's incredible, Elena. I always knew there was something special about how you handled that table." Elena studied him carefully, recognizing the shift in his tone from dismissive to suddenly accommodating. "You told me to stop serving him," she reminded him gently, though without malice. "You said it didn't make business sense." Derek's expression faltered slightly. "Well, obviously I didn't know the full situation at the time. If I had known who he really was." "That's exactly the point," Elena said quietly. "None of us knew who he really was. I served him because it felt right, not because I expected anything in return." The conversation left Derek visibly uncomfortable, and he excused himself shortly after, though Elena noticed him treating her with noticeably more respect in the days that followed, a change she found both amusing and slightly saddening, given how quickly people's attitudes shifted based purely on newfound wealth, rather than any change in her actual character. Other co-workers approached her with similar shifts in demeanor. Priya, the waitress who had once complained about accidentally serving Mr. Alden years earlier, now sought Elena out during breaks, asking detailed questions about the inheritance, sometimes hinting, not so subtly, about potential financial assistance for her own struggles. Elena navigated these interactions carefully, trying to balance generosity with the wisdom to recognize when people approached her out of genuine friendship versus opportunistic interest. She found herself growing more cautious, more discerning, developing an instinct for distinguishing authentic care from calculated attempts to benefit from her sudden change in circumstances. Her mother, Rosa, expressed a mixture of joy and worry when Elena explained the full situation. "This is wonderful news, mija," Rosa said, embracing her daughter tightly. "But please, be careful. Money changes how people treat you. Not everyone who suddenly wants to be close to you has good intentions." Elena appreciated her mother's caution, recognizing the wisdom behind it, even as she navigated the initial excitement and disorientation that came with such a dramatic change in fortune. She used a portion of the inheritance immediately to resolve the eviction crisis, paying off her outstanding debts and securing a more stable, comfortable living situation for herself and Diego. She established a dedicated medical fund for her son's ongoing treatment, finally able to access specialists and therapies that had previously remained financially out of reach. Diego, still too young to fully understand the complexities of everything happening around him, simply expressed relief and excitement at moving into a new apartment with more space and no longer needing to worry about the medicine that had once tasted so unpleasant, now replaced with more effective and comfortable treatment options. "Are we rich now?" Diego asked one evening, his eyes wide with curious wonder, as they toured their new apartment for the first time. Elena knelt down to his level, choosing her words carefully. "We're fortunate," she said. "A very kind man helped us in a way we never expected. But being rich isn't just about money, Diego. It's about how we treat other people, especially those who might be struggling the way we used to." Diego nodded solemnly, though Elena could tell the full weight of her words would take time to fully sink in, given his young age. Still, she felt it was important to establish these values early, hoping to instill in him the same appreciation for genuine kindness that Mr. Alden had recognized within her. As weeks passed, Elena began working more closely with Nathaniel Cross to establish the charitable fund outlined in Mr. Alden's will. She spent hours reviewing applications from service industry workers facing financial hardships similar to her own past struggles, carefully evaluating each case with the same attention to detail and genuine care that had defined her approach to serving customers at the diner for so many years. She discovered a profound sense of purpose in this new role, one that extended far beyond simply distributing funds. She met with recipients personally whenever possible, listening to their stories, offering guidance and encouragement alongside the financial assistance the fund provided. She recognized herself in many of these individuals: single parents working multiple jobs, workers facing unexpected medical crises, families teetering on the edge of housing instability despite their best efforts to maintain stability. Not every interaction proved straightforward, however. Some individuals approached the fund with expectations that exceeded what the program could reasonably provide, occasionally expressing frustration or anger when their applications did not receive the full amount they had hoped for. Elena learned to navigate these difficult conversations with patience, drawing upon years of experience managing difficult customers at the diner, though the emotional stakes now felt considerably higher, given the genuine hardships involved. She also faced occasional resentment from those who felt she had received an unfair windfall, simply through chance encounter with a wealthy stranger, rather than through hard work or deserving circumstances. She absorbed this criticism with the same quiet grace she had always applied to difficult situations, choosing not to defend herself extensively, but instead, focusing on demonstrating through her actions that she intended to use this unexpected gift responsibly and generously. Throughout this period of transition, Elena continued working occasional shifts at the diner, unwilling to abandon entirely the community and routine that had defined so much of her life. She found comfort in the familiar rhythm of the work, even as her circumstances outside those walls had transformed so dramatically. Gary, the cook who had worked alongside her for years, remained one of the few co-workers who treated her exactly as he always had, neither fawning over her new wealth nor expressing resentment toward her good fortune. "You're still the same person," Gary told her one afternoon during a quiet shift. "Money doesn't change who you are underneath. It just gives you more room to be that person fully." Elena appreciated his words, recognizing the truth within them as she navigated the complex social dynamics that had emerged following her inheritance. She resolved to remain grounded, to continue extending the same genuine kindness that had originally caught Mr. Alden's attention all those years ago, regardless of how her circumstances had changed. As the months progressed, Elena began envisioning a more permanent way to honor Mr. Alden's legacy, something beyond simply managing the charitable fund established in his name. She began considering the possibility of opening her own establishment, one built specifically around the values Mr. Alden had come to represent during his final years, a place where genuine kindness and dignity would define every interaction, regardless of a customer's ability to leave a generous tip. A year had passed since Nathaniel Cross first walked into the diner, carrying news that would forever alter the course of Elena's life. In that time, she had transformed from an exhausted waitress, struggling to keep her family afloat, into a woman with newfound purpose, stability, and a deep commitment to honoring the legacy left behind by a man she had come to understand only after his passing. The small cafe stood on a quiet corner not far from where the original diner still operated, its exterior modest but welcoming, painted in warm, gentle colors that invited passers-by to step inside. Elena had named it simply the corner table, a nod to the booth where her relationship with Walter Alden had unfolded over 6 patient years. She had used a portion of her inheritance to establish the cafe, but had structured its operations around principles that extended far beyond typical business practices. A dedicated portion of the profits fed directly into the charitable fund established in Mr. Alden's name, ensuring that struggling workers throughout the community continued receiving support long after the initial excitement of her inheritance had faded from public conversation. She had also implemented a unique policy within the cafe itself, one that had drawn some curiosity and occasional skepticism from those unfamiliar with its purpose. Every day, one table remained specifically designated for anyone facing financial hardship, offering a free meal to those who needed it, no questions asked, no judgment cast, simply an extension of the quiet dignity Mr. Alden had shown her during her own years of struggle. On a crisp autumn morning, Elena arrived at the cafe before opening, moving through the familiar rhythm of preparing for the day ahead. She greeted her small staff, many of whom she had personally recruited from among service workers who had once benefited from the charitable fund she now helped oversee, offering them stable employment and genuine respect that had often been absent from their previous positions. As the morning rush began to settle, Elena noticed a young woman enter the cafe, her posture carrying the particular weariness Elena recognized instantly from her own years of struggle. The woman glanced around uncertainly before settling into the corner booth, the same designated table reserved for those facing hardship, though she seemed hesitant, unsure whether she truly belonged there. Elena approached the table personally, carrying a warm smile and a genuine sense of recognition. "Good morning," she said gently. "What can I get for you today?" The young woman hesitated, glancing at the menu with visible discomfort. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I don't have much money right now. Maybe just coffee." Elena knelt slightly beside the table, meeting the woman's eyes with warmth rather than pity. "This table is reserved for exactly this kind of morning," she said gently. "Order whatever you'd like. Breakfast is taken care of today." The woman's eyes widened with surprise and gratitude, tears welling up unexpectedly, as the weight of her circumstances seemed to momentarily ease under Elena's kindness. "Thank you," she whispered. "You don't understand how much this means." Elena smiled, a knowing warmth settling over her features. "Actually," she said softly, "I understand more than you might expect." As she walked away to prepare the woman's order personally, Elena found her thoughts drifting back to Walter Alden, to the 6 years of quiet, unassuming Tuesdays that had once felt like an unappreciated burden, but had ultimately transformed into the foundation of everything she had since built. She thought about his letter, his words about kindness offered freely, without expectation of reward, and how those words had come to define not only her own values, but the very purpose of the establishment she now proudly called her own. She returned to the young woman's table with a full breakfast, along with a warm cup of coffee poured to a level she instinctively kept just below the rim, a small habit she had carried forward without fully realizing its origin, until years of repetition had made it second nature. "If you ever need anything else," Elena said, placing the plate down gently, "you're always welcome here. No judgment, no conditions, just kindness." The young woman nodded, overwhelmed with gratitude, promising to return once her circumstances improved, determined to somehow repay the kindness she had received that morning. Elena watched her eat in peaceful silence for a moment, before returning to her other responsibilities, feeling a quiet, profound sense of fulfillment settle over her. She thought about Diego, now healthier and thriving, in ways she had once believed impossible, about her mother, finally able to retire comfortably after decades of hard work, and about the countless individuals who had benefited from the charitable fund she continued overseeing, alongside Nathaniel Cross. She thought, too, about the strange, 6-year journey that had led her to this moment, a journey that had once felt like quiet suffering, disguised as routine loyalty, but had ultimately revealed itself to be something far more profound, a patient, deliberate test of character that had transformed not only her own circumstances, but the lives of countless others who would never fully understand the origins of the kindness now extended toward them. As the cafe filled with the comfortable hum of morning conversation, sunlight streaming gently through the windows, Elena allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection, gratitude washing over her for a man she had spent 6 years serving, without truly understanding, and who had, through his final act of generosity, taught her the true, lasting value of kindness, offered freely, without expectation, and without limit. The corner booth remained occupied throughout the morning, first by the young woman who had arrived, struggling, and left with renewed hope, and later by other customers, whose stories Elena would never fully know, each one, in some small way, continuing the quiet legacy that Walter Alden had begun so many years earlier, with nothing more than a cup of black coffee, 2 slices of toast, and $2 left gently upon the table.